The night my husband slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table, he was smiling. Not a sad smile. Not the smile of a man who felt guilty about ending 12 years of marriage. It was the smile of someone who had already moved on, who had, in fact, moved on a long time ago, and was just now getting around to informing me. "I think this is the right thing for both of us," he said. "You'll be better off, Rachel, you know that." I looked at the papers, I looked at his face, and I said, "Okay." He blinked. I think he expected tears, maybe screaming. He braced himself for a scene. I could see it in the way he positioned himself near the doorway, like he needed a clear exit route. But I just picked up the pen, flipped to the signature page, and signed my name in the same careful handwriting my third-grade teacher had made me practice until my hand cramped. He left that night to go back to her apartment. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, in the house we bought together in Raleigh, in the neighborhood where we'd talked about raising kids, and I thought about the folder sitting in my desk drawer upstairs. The folder I hadn't shown him yet. I should back up. My husband's name is Thomas. Tom, to most people. Dr. Thomas Hargrove, to his patients and colleagues at the orthopedic practice where he'd made partner 3 years ago. He was the kind of man who looked good on paper, broad shoulders, easy laugh, the sort of confidence that came from having been told his whole life that he was exceptional. When we met at a friend's wedding in Charleston, I was 31 and flattered that a man like that kept finding reasons to refill my champagne glass. We got married 18 months later. I quit my job in Charlotte and moved to Raleigh for him. I built a life around his schedule, his moods, his career. I freelanced in marketing from home so I could be flexible when his hours ran long, or a conference came up last minute. I told myself that was what partnership looked like, that I was investing in us, not erasing myself. I want to be honest about something. The first few years were genuinely good. All good enough that I didn't look too closely at the parts that weren't. Tom was charming and funny and could make a whole room feel like the most important room when he walked into it. He remembered small details about people. He sent handwritten thank you notes. He coached a youth soccer team on Saturday mornings even when he was tired. He also, as it turned out, had been sleeping with his office manager for almost 2 years. Her name was Cassidy. She was 28, had a laugh I'd heard him describe once as refreshing, and had been working at his practice since just after he made partner. I didn't find out about her the way you might expect. No lipstick on a collar, no forgotten receipt. I found out because our accountant called me. Not Tom, me. She'd left a message on my cell while I was at the grocery store, saying she had some questions about the joint savings account, and could I call her back when I had a chance. Routine enough? Except when I called her back, she asked why we'd transferred $40,000 into a new account I had no knowledge of 6 weeks earlier. I sat in my car in the Harris Teeter parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive home. Here is what I did not do. I did not confront Tom that night. I did not call my mother. I did not post anything on social media or cry to my friends. What I did was call a divorce attorney, a woman named Sandra who came recommended by a colleague of mine, and tell her I needed to understand my options before I made any moves. Sandra told me something I've thought about almost every day since. The spouse who reacts first usually loses the most ground. If you can hold it together long enough to gather information, you'll be in a much stronger position. I held it together. Over the next 6 weeks, I became a very good actress. I made Tom's coffee in the mornings. I asked about his patients, his rounds, his cases. I went to his practice's holiday party and shook Cassidy's hand and told her it was nice to meet her, watching her face for the flicker of something she couldn't quite hide. I took mental notes. I smiled. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator. His name was Darren, a quiet man in his 50s who specialized in financial investigations and had done work for Sandra's clients before. I didn't want photographs. I wanted a paper trail. I told him about the $40,000 and about Tom's habit of paying for things in cash lately. Restaurant receipts, weekend golf trips, a charge I'd seen on our business credit card for a jeweler in downtown Raleigh. What Darren found over the next few weeks was worse than I'd prepared myself for. The $40,000 was just the beginning. Tom had been quietly moving money for nearly a year. Small transfers here, a new investment account there. Nothing individually alarming, but collectively a pattern. Sandra called it dissipation of marital assets. She said some of it might constitute fraud. She used words like discovery and forensic accounting in a tone that told me this was serious. But the thing that hit me hardest, the detail that made me sit down on the floor at my home office and press my back against the wall and breathe slowly through my nose, was something Darren found almost by accident. Tom had taken out a life insurance policy 18 months ago. He was the beneficiary. I was not. The policy was on our son. We have one child together, a boy named Eli who just turned 8. He has Tom's coloring and my gap between his front teeth, and he thinks everything in the world is hilarious and is deeply committed to the Dallas Cowboys, even though neither of us is from Texas. I love him in the way that makes every other love feel like a rough draft. When Darren explained what he'd found, I made him repeat it twice. A life insurance policy taken out in Tom's name on our 8-year-old child with Tom as sole beneficiary. It was legal, creepy and cold, but technically legal. What it told me, Sandra said, was that Tom had been planning this exit for a long time. That this wasn't an affair that spiraled into something bigger. This was deliberate. I thought about all the mornings I'd handed him his coffee. I kept handing it to him. Darren also confirmed what I already suspected about Cassidy. She'd been at the practice 2 years. The affair had started within 3 months of her hire. She knew Tom was married. She knew about Eli. She had, at various points, been the recipient of gifts purchased with our shared credit card. The jeweler charge I'd noticed was a bracelet. A gold bracelet. I added that to the folder. Tom served me the papers on a Tuesday. He'd clearly been coached by his own attorney. I recognized the strategy in how the papers were structured, with a proposed asset division that assumed I didn't know about the transferred money. He offered me the house and primary custody of Eli, which seemed generous until Sandra pointed out that the house had a second mortgage I hadn't known about, and Eli's custody arrangement was designed to minimize Tom's support obligations. I signed anyway, not because I was naive, because Sandra had advised me to let him think we were in agreement while she prepared the actual response filing. What I was really waiting for was March. Tom's medical practice had its annual partners' dinner in mid-March every year, a formal event at the Umstead Hotel. The kind of night where everyone wore their best and gave each other awards and the open bar ran until 11. Tom had taken me every year we'd been together. This year, for the first time, he was taking Cassidy. I know this because Eli mentioned while eating cereal on a Sunday morning that Daddy's girlfriend is coming to his fancy work dinner. Children are the world's most reliable informants. They just report what they observe, without any understanding of what they're handing you. I called Sandra that afternoon. "How close are you?" I asked. 2 weeks, she said. Maybe 10 days. Can you make it 10 days? She made it 9. The partners' dinner was on a Friday. Sandra filed the response to Tom's divorce petition that Thursday afternoon, a response that included, attached as exhibits, Darren's full investigative report, the forensic accounting findings, the documentation of the transferred assets, the second mortgage, and the life insurance policy. It also included something Tom didn't know I had. 8 months earlier, when Tom and I were still theoretically working on our marriage, before I knew about Cassidy, before the accountant called, when I was just a woman who sensed something was wrong but couldn't prove it, Tom had asked me to sign some paperwork for what he described as a practice restructuring. He'd been in a hurry, late for something, and he slid a stack of documents across the counter and said he'd explain later. He just needed my signature on 3 pages. I'd signed, because that's what you do when you trust someone. What I'd signed, it turned out, was not purely a restructuring document. Buried in the stack was an amendment to the partnership agreement that listed me as a guarantor on a commercial loan the practice had taken out. A loan Tom had used partly to fund the new account where he'd been parking the transferred money. Tom had made me legally responsible for a debt I didn't know existed to fund an account I didn't know about to facilitate his exit from our marriage. Sandra had highlighted this in yellow. Her note in the margin said, This is significant. The response filing went to Tom's attorney at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday. I know the exact time because Sandra sent me a text that said only filed. Good luck tomorrow. I got my hair done that Friday afternoon. I wore the dark green dress I bought for a charity gala 2 years ago and never had occasion to wear again. Fitted, serious, the kind of dress that makes you feel like you've made a decision. I drove to the Umstead Hotel and gave my name at the door and told the woman checking the list that I was a guest of one of the partners. The room was full and warm, lit with the kind of soft light that makes everyone look better than they are. I spotted Tom at a table near the front, laughing, glass in hand, Cassidy next to him in a cream-colored dress. She was wearing a gold bracelet. I let myself look at them for a moment. Not in anger, exactly. More like I was cataloguing something, closing a chapter so I could read what came next. I walked to their table. Tom saw me when I was about 10 feet away. I watched the laughter drain off his face, replaced by something that moved to confusion and into fear so fast it was almost athletic. "Rachel," he said. "Hi, Tom." I smiled at Cassidy. "You must be Cassidy. I've heard a lot about you." She looked at Tom. He said nothing. I set an envelope on the table in front of him, cream-colored, sealed, his name written on the front in my careful handwriting. "Sandra filed our response today," I said. "Your attorney has a copy, but I wanted to make sure you had yours for the weekend. You'll want to call him tonight, actually." I paused. "The part about the guarantor signature is on page 42. Tom's face had gone the color of old paper. "The part about the insurance policy on Eli is on page 57, I said, and I watched Cassidy turn to look at him with an expression I recognized, the expression of a person encountering new information about someone they thought they knew. I picked up the glass of water sitting at an empty place setting nearby and took a sip, because I was genuinely thirsty and I'd earned it. "Enjoy the dinner," I said, and I walked out. I want to be careful not to make this sound cleaner than it was. The months that followed were not a montage of me thriving while Tom collapsed. Divorces, paperwork and child custody schedules, and arguments about who gets the KitchenAid stand mixer. It is Eli crying in the back seat on the way home from his dad's because he doesn't understand why everything changed. It is 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when you can't sleep and you catch yourself wondering if you missed something, if you could have done something differently, if 12 years really just end like that. But here is what the legal process produced, because facts matter. The court's discovery process confirmed the full scope of Tom's financial maneuvering. The transferred assets were categorized as dissipated marital property. The second mortgage on the house was discharged in the settlement in a way that left me with significantly more equity than his original proposal had offered. The guarantor issue, my signature on that loan amendment, was addressed in a way that Sandra described as favorable, which in attorney language means I came out better than I might have. Tom's partners, it turned out, were not thrilled about the loan amendment situation. There were internal discussions I wasn't privy to but heard about secondhand. His standing at the practice became complicated. Cassidy, for what it's worth, was not a villain in the way I'd initially imagined her. She was a 28-year-old woman who'd been told a version of my marriage that bore little resemblance to reality. When the full picture came out, through the legal filings, through the details that became less private as the process moved forward, she ended things with Tom about 6 weeks after the partners' dinner. I found this out from Tom himself in one of our co-parenting calls, delivered in a tone that seemed to expect sympathy. I did not provide sympathy. What I did do was take Sandra's advice and get a very good forensic accountant of my own, who found 2 additional accounts Tom hadn't disclosed in his initial filings. That discovery added several months to the process and a considerable amount to the final settlement. Here is what I know now, 14 months out, living in a smaller house in Carey with Eli's soccer cleats perpetually in the middle of the hallway. The moment I signed those divorce papers, calmly, without a scene, in a kitchen that still smelled like the coffee I'd made him, was not weakness. I have had people, after I've told parts of this story, say they could never have done that, could never have smiled and handed him his coffee and waited, could never have walked into that hotel and kept their voice even. But here is the thing about waiting. It only works if you're doing something while you wait. I wasn't just being patient, I was building something. Every call with Sandra, every document Darren sent over, every careful question I asked our accountant, that was construction. I was building the thing that would replace the life Tom had decided to dismantle without my input. I am not the woman who cried in the Harris Teeter parking lot anymore. Or rather, I am that woman, but I am also the woman who drove home after 20 minutes, called a lawyer, and started keeping notes. Ely is doing well. He has a good therapist who helps him understand that 2 homes doesn't mean half a family, and he has started making his own breakfast on weekends, which he considers an extraordinary personal achievement, and I consider the most hopeful thing I've ever witnessed. Last month, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "This is Cassidy. I know this is strange. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know everything I should have known." I sat with that for a while. Then I typed back, "Thank you for saying that. I hope you're okay." And I meant it, not because what she did was fine, but because holding on to it cost something I'd rather spend elsewhere. The green dress is in my closet. I'm keeping it. Some things you earn and then you keep. The image I keep coming back to is Tom's face in that hotel ballroom. Not when I walked in, but the half second before he saw me. He was laughing. Completely at ease, glass raised, surrounded by colleagues who admired him. And I thought he built this version of himself on the assumption that I would never look too closely. That's the part that took me longest to understand. The betrayal wasn't only the affair, or the money, or the signature he tricked me into. It was the calculation underneath all of it. The quiet decision that I wasn't someone who would look closely. That I was manageable, that my trust was a resource he could spend. What changed everything for me was a single phone call from an accountant I'd barely spoken to before. That one call cracked the wall, and once I started looking, I couldn't stop. I think about the version of me who almost didn't look, who almost accepted the story Tom had prepared and signed away 12 years without understanding what was actually on the table. She was so close to being the ending of this story instead of the beginning of a different one. I don't think intelligence is about being clever or suspicious by nature. It's about being willing to ask the next question, even when the answer might cost you something. It's about Sandra's voice on the phone saying the spouse who reacts first loses the most ground, and choosing to believe her even when every instinct was screaming at me to do something, anything, immediately. Real clarity isn't loud. It's the kind that sits with you quietly in a Harris Teeter parking lot and tells you to drive home and make a plan. And then there's the matter of character, of who you decide to be when the person who was supposed to know you best turns out to have been building an exit while you were building a life. I could have burned things down. I had enough material. There were ways I could have made those months ugly for Tom that I chose not to take. Not because I lacked the means, but because I knew the difference between justice and revenge, and only one of them leaves you with something worth keeping afterward. Cassidy texted me 14 months later to apologize. I wrote back, "That cost me something small and gave me something larger, and I've never regretted it." But I want to be honest about the third thing because it's the one nobody talks about, the sheer endurance of it. The mornings I made his coffee and said nothing. The holiday party where I shook her hand. The 9 weeks between the accountant's call and the moment Sandra said filed. People ask how I did it, and I think they expect a strategy, a system. What it actually was choosing, over and over, on ordinary Tuesday mornings, to hold on one more day. Grit isn't a feeling, it's a practice. It's what you do when the feeling has long since left and you're running on the decision you made 3 weeks ago. Ely made his own breakfast again this morning. Scrambled eggs, slightly overcooked, enormously proud of himself. I watched him and thought, this is what I was holding the line for. The green dress is still in my closet. Some things you earn and they stay earned.